Vanessa Cole was 39 years old the afternoon she handed a man a set of keys to the guest unit above her garage, and he smiled at her with the comfortable ease of someone who had no idea he was moving onto property he would never own. She had driven herself to that address in a 5-year-old Honda Car-V with a cracked armrest and a county utilities parking permit clipped to the visor. She wore steel-toed work boots and a company badge clipped to her jacket pocket. Her hair was pulled back the way it always was on inspection days. She looked like a woman who fixed other people's problems for a reasonable hourly rate and packed her own lunch. Most people assumed she was. Her wife Denise had built an entire life around that assumption. What Denise had told her lover, a man named Garrett Sims, was that the property belonged to a private landlord named V. Cole, who was happy to offer a reduced rate for a quiet, professional tenant. What she had not told him was that V. Cole was her wife, that the company whose badge sat clipped to Vanessa's jacket had built and managed 17 commercial and residential properties across 4 states, and that the name on the LC that owned every inch of that land, the guest unit, the main house, the driveway, the lot behind the fence, was printed in ink that had been drying for 11 years before Denise Whitmore ever signed, a single document in their shared life. Garrett Sims paid his first month's rent directly into Vanessa's business operating account without knowing it. $240,000 sat in that account. He deposited 850 of them with the cheerful confidence of a man who believed he had gotten a deal. What Garrett never thought to ask, not once in the weeks he had been sleeping in Vanessa's guest unit and in Vanessa's marital bed on alternating nights, was whose name appeared on the property deed he had signed his lease against, or what the V&V, Cole Development Group, actually stood for, or what the woman with the work boots and the company badge did when she was not showing tenants to apartments. What happened next would cost both of them everything they thought they had arranged so carefully. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The morning Vanessa handed Garrett his keys had started the way most of her mornings started, with black coffee and a legal pad covered in load calculations for a mixed-use development outside Greensboro. She sat at the kitchen island she had designed herself, beveled marble edge, brushed copper fixtures her father had helped her select before his hands got too unsteady for finish work, and she went through the numbers the way she always did, starting from the foundation and working upward. Her father, a carpenter named Bernard Cole, had spent 40 years building other people's houses in Charlotte and dying with calloused hands that could still read a warped board by feel alone. He had taught Vanessa to measure twice, cut once, and never trust a structure she had not personally inspected. He had told her something once when she was 19 and furious about a contractor who had overcharged her first employer. You don't respond to bad work by getting loud, Van. You document it, you correct it, and you build something that makes the bad work irrelevant. Bernard Cole had passed 6 years ago, leaving Vanessa his tools, a house she paid off in his memory, and a way of moving through problems that looked, to people who did not understand construction, exactly like stillness. Vanessa had built V. Cole Development Group from a 2-person renovation outfit to a mid-sized commercial and residential developer over 11 years of early mornings and methodical weekend work. She employed 22 people. She carried 4 active projects at any given time. She had never once put her full balance sheet in a place Denise could find it, not out of secrecy, initially, but out of the same structural logic that kept her business entities clean and separated, the way you kept load-bearing elements isolated from decorative ones, so that a problem in the finish work didn't compromise the frame. She had married Denise Whitmore 8 years ago in a small outdoor ceremony near Lake Norman, with 40 guests and a rented arch wrapped in greenery and a cake Denise had chosen without consulting her, and that turned out to be exactly right. Denise was warm and magnetic and spoke in the kind of assured language that made people want to agree with her before they fully understood what they were agreeing to. She had a gift for making the people around her feel necessary and specially chosen, and for a long time, Vanessa had found that quality genuinely comfortable. The way a well-built room had good acoustics without you needing to think about why. Denise worked as a regional sales manager for a medical supply company. She made a respectable salary. She spent it on things that impressed other people and told Vanessa were investments. The first sign Vanessa had filed and noted without acting on was a cologne in the upstairs bathroom she had not purchased and Denise had not mentioned. A small detail, a single loose tile, the kind of thing a structural engineer noticed and logged without making noise about it. Because making noise about a single tile was not the same as understanding the problem that had caused it. 3 months before Garrett moved in, there had been a phone left on the kitchen counter for 40 seconds while Denise stepped outside to take a call on the back porch. Long enough for a name Vanessa did not recognize to appear twice in the notification preview. Long enough to log the time, the date, and the name in the notes application of her secondary phone. The matte black one with no case, the one tied to the company's operating accounts and her attorney's direct line. The secondary phone lived in the inner pocket of Vanessa's work bag where it had always been, steady and invisible, the same way her father's level had always lived in the tool loop of his belt, regardless of what job he was walking into. She had noted it. She had not asked. She had waited, the way every experienced inspector waited, for the structure to show her what it was actually made of rather than what it presented itself as. The afternoon Vanessa learned the full shape of the arrangement, she came home from a site visit 2 hours earlier than she had told Denise she would. She did not call ahead. She parked a half block down out of habit more than calculation, though she would later reflect that the two had become the same thing in her, habit and calculation blurred into one posture over a long enough time. Denise's car was in the driveway. So was a silver Mazda she had not seen before. She photographed the plate from 6 feet away with the secondary phone. The same quiet motion she used when photographing site conditions she wanted documented, and walked to the side entry of the house, the one she had used since the kitchen renovation blocked the main front walkway. The house was not loud. It was never loud with Denise, who had always preferred things kept at a register that sounded, to anyone nearby, like ordinary life. What Vanessa heard as she stood just inside the side entry was what she would later describe to no one in particular as the unmistakable rhythm of practiced familiarity. Not urgency, not passion at its peak. The settled, unhurried cadence of two people who had been doing something long enough to stop hurrying through it. Her hands did not shake. She moved back through the side door and closed it without sound, and walked to the small detached workshop at the edge of the property. The one Denise believed was used for storage and cleaning equipment and the occasional holiday item. The one that had served as Vanessa's secondary filing space for 4 years. She photographed the Mazda's plate a second time on her way for the record. She spent 40 minutes in the workshop. By the time Denise appeared at the workshop door with a manufactured look of mild surprise and a plate of cheese and crackers, as though this were a perfectly ordinary afternoon, Vanessa had already pulled up the lease application Garrett had submitted through the property management address she ran as a VCOL development subsidiary. She had confirmed his name, his employer status as a freelance marketing consultant, his lack of verifiable assets, and the email address through which Denise had referred him to the listing. That email address was the same one whose notification preview she had logged 3 months earlier. She had also pulled up the joint checking account. $4,200 had moved through it in increments over 7 months, amounts small enough not to draw the eye on a quick review, 300 here, 250 there, 400 on one occasion. Patient, careful, the behavior of someone who understood that slow accumulation was less likely to be noticed than a single visible transaction. Denise stood in the workshop doorway and said she had not expected Vanessa home so early. Vanessa said the site had wrapped ahead of schedule. Denise said that was great, and did she want dinner? Vanessa said dinner would be nice. She closed the laptop and followed Denise inside and set the table while Denise moved around the kitchen Vanessa had designed, and she moved with the same deliberate calm that had always defined how she worked. The calm of someone who knew exactly which phase of the process she was in. She opened a new folder on her company laptop that night after Denise had gone to bed. She named it simply Sims G. Then she sent a message to her attorney. Patricia Okafor had been Vanessa's business attorney for 7 years. A woman of 61 with reading glasses on a beaded chain and a voice that sounded pleasant right up to the point when you realized it contained no warmth that was not being deployed for a specific purpose. Patricia did not flinch at complicated information. It was the primary reason Vanessa had chosen her. She listened to the summary of what Vanessa had found without interrupting, which was her standard practice. When Vanessa finished, Patricia was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. He's in the guest unit. On a standard 12-month lease through the property management subsidiary, and she referred him to the listing through the same email address that contacted him previously. I have the chain forwarded. Patricia was quiet for another 2 seconds. Do not move money. Do not close accounts. Do not change access permissions on anything joint. You photograph, you log, you forward to me. Nothing visible. Understood. I'll pull the marital asset documentation first thing tomorrow. Then Vanessa. I want you to understand something clearly. You have built this in a way that is almost perfectly clean. The LLC predates the marriage. The title was never transferred. The accounts are separated. What she did with marital funds is the only variable, and that variable is already documented. A pause. Keep doing exactly what you're doing. Vanessa already understood the structure. She had built it. You did not spend 11 years constructing load-bearing frameworks without knowing the precise difference between a cosmetic crack and a foundational failure. Real power, her father had believed, operated in rooms where nobody was performing for the wrong audience. 3 days passed in the ordinary rhythm of a life being carefully observed. In that time, Vanessa identified a secondary account Denise maintained separately, confirmed through public records that Garrett Sims had been named in a civil fraud complaint in Mecklenburg County in 2019 that had been resolved quietly and without admission, and pulled the complete title history on the guest unit to confirm that no marital interest of any kind had ever been recorded against the deed. That last fact was the result of a conversation she had held with Patricia 7 years earlier, during the early years of the marriage, in which Patricia had noted, with the tone of someone stating a structural best practice, that keeping the development entities legally independent from any marital estate was simply sound business architecture. Vanessa had agreed. She had signed the document. She had filed the paperwork. She had never once brought it up at home. It had been sound business architecture. On the 4th day, she drove across town to sit with her uncle Clarence, her mother's younger brother, who was 73 and had spent 30 years working dispatch for the County Transit Authority. He had seen Denise at 2 holiday dinners and 1 birthday party, and had said, each time, that she seemed like a woman more interested in a position than a person. Clarence listened to everything in his living room armchair, with his hands folded over his middle and his eyes steady on Vanessa's face. He was a man who had absorbed complicated information for decades without letting it disturb the surface of him. When she finished, he said, "You know what you're doing. I know what I have. I wanted to make sure I wasn't missing anything." He studied her. "That man up there. He doesn't know who you are. He has no idea." Clarence nodded slowly. "Then he's already made every mistake he's going to make, and he made them in writing." A pause. "Your father would have found that very satisfying." Vanessa thought about that the whole drive home. Bernard Cole had always said the most dangerous people on any job site were the ones who didn't know what they were standing on. Not malicious, necessarily, just operating without the information that would have changed every decision they made. There was a particular kind of consequence reserved for that. It was never loud. It was just final. By the following Friday, Patricia's financial liaison had confirmed what the preliminary bank records suggested. $4,700 in identifiable marital funds had been directed through a combination of joint account withdrawals and a credit card Vanessa had not known existed, towards subsidized living arrangements for a third party in a property that party had no idea was owned by the person he was being hidden from. The credit card had also been used at a hotel in Asheville twice, at a restaurant in Uptown Charlotte on 4 evenings, and at a furniture retailer where the purchased items did not appear anywhere in the main house. They were in the guest unit. Vanessa had seen them during the move-in walkthrough. Patricia's paralegal Cross referenced the furniture receipts with the lease start date and produced a 3-page timeline that made the shape of the whole arrangement visible in one reading. $4,700, Patricia said. Marital funds directed to support a tenant in a property he doesn't know your client owns. Rosalind James added without affect, "The 2019 civil complaint suggests this isn't Mr. Sims's first arrangement where someone lacked material information." Patricia looked at Vanessa over her reading glasses. "This is going to be clean." The Saturday between that meeting and the mediation date, Vanessa made pork chops and greens and cornbread from her grandmother's recipe, the one she only made when she needed something to do with her hands that required enough attention to keep the mind from moving too fast. Denise came in from the Greer smelling of the outdoors and said it smelled wonderful, and asked about the Greensboro project and whether they were going to hit the next delivery date. Vanessa said they were running about 3 days ahead of schedule. Denise said that was great. Vanessa said it was. She set 2 plates on the table her father had helped her carry up 2 flights of stairs in the old apartment, poured water into both glasses, and sat across from her wife and listened to a conversation about a difficult regional manager and an upcoming conference in Raleigh that Vanessa now understood she would not need to put in the shared calendar. She registered all of it the way she registered bid estimates, accurately and completely and without the interference of feeling, because the feeling would have its proper moment and this was not it. She was in the preparation phase. And preparation, her father had always said, was not a pause in the work. It was the most important part of the work. The mediation was held on a Tuesday at 10 in the morning in a conference room at Patricia Okafor's office on South Tryon Street, a room with a view of a parking structure and 2 large framed prints of abstract geometric forms that Vanessa had always quietly appreciated for their precision. Patricia had set the room the night before. 2 binders for each party. Water glasses, the particular stillness of a space where significant things were about to be confirmed. Denise arrived with her attorney, a man named Fowler, who had an easy manner and a smooth way of pausing before he spoke that was probably effective in rooms where he had more information than he did in this one. She also arrived with Garrett Sims, which had not been expected, but was not in retrospect. Surprising, he sat in the chair beside Denise with the settled posture of someone who believed the room had been arranged in his favor. Vanessa was already seated when they came in. Patricia sat at her left. Rosalind James sat at her right, with both binders squared in front of her. Fowler went first, outlining what he described as the shared marital estate, which in his telling included the house on Calder Street, the contents of the joint accounts, and what he referred to twice as the income-producing rental property on the same lot as a shared asset to be divided equitably under North Carolina law. Patricia let him finish without expression. Then she said, "I'd like to begin with Exhibit A." Rosalind placed a single document in front of each person at the table. It was the deed to 4412 Calder Street, recorded in Mecklenburg County in 2013, held in the name of V. Cole Development Group LLC, single-member entity, established and registered 4 years before the marriage of Vanessa Cole and Denise Whitmore. Fowler looked at the document. Then he looked at his client. Then he looked at Vanessa with the expression of a man making a rapid and uncomfortable adjustment to his understanding of the room. Garrett Sims looked at the document for a longer time. Then he looked at Vanessa in a way that was different from how he had looked at her the afternoon she handed him a key, with a particular focus of someone who was now reading a label that had been in front of him the entire time. V. Cole Development Group, Patricia said, in the same tone she used to confirm a contract term, is not a marital asset. The entity predates the marriage by 4 years. The deed was never transferred, commingled, or recorded under any joint ownership structure. The LC holds title to 12 properties in the Charlotte metropolitan area, including the property at 4412 Calder Street, including the guest unit currently occupied under a 12-month lease. She allowed one breath of silence. A lease signed by Mr. Garrett Sims. The room was quiet enough that the ventilation system was audible. Rosalind placed Exhibit B on the table, the lease agreement, 2 pages, Garrett Sims's signature on the bottom of page 2, the property management company's name across the top, and the parent entity, V, Cole Development Group, printed in the document footer in 12-point font that had apparently never been read. Garrett said slowly, as though working through the words as he spoke them. "She told me the owner was a private landlord who didn't want to. The owner," Patricia said, without raising her voice, "is seated at this table and has been seated at this table for the past 14 minutes. Denise did not speak. She was looking at the surface of the conference table. Exhibit C was the bank records. The $4,700 in marital funds routed through joint accounts and a separate credit card toward third-party residential arrangements over the course of 8 months. Exhibit D was the credit card statement, the hotel in Asheville, the 4 restaurant evenings in Uptown, the furniture purchase cross-referenced with a guest unit inventory. Exhibit E was the 2019 civil complaint. Not introduced as legally controlling, Patricia noted, but as relevant context for the judgment and full disclosure of information that should have been provided before any marital funds were directed to arrangements involving Mr. Sims, Fowler started to object. Then he looked at the 3 binders on the table, at the 12-point footer on the lease his client's companion had signed, and he set his pen down. Denise said, "Vanessa." Vanessa looked at her. "I didn't mean for it to. I know you didn't," Vanessa said. "She meant it. The way you meant any accurate assessment of how a structure had failed, not with bitterness, because bitterness required ongoing emotional investment in people who no longer warranted it, but with clarity, which was something different and considerably more durable. You thought you were managing a situation. I was managing one too. The difference was what each of us was building toward and for how long." She stood. She gathered her copy of the exhibits into her bag, not because she needed them, but because thoroughness was its own practice. "You had 8 years to understand who I was," she said. She was not speaking to be heard by the room. She was speaking to be finished. You chose to understand what was convenient. That decision belongs to you now. So do its consequences. She picked up her bag and walked to the conference room door. She did not look at Garrett Sims, who was still holding the lease with both hands, still reading the footer, still doing the arithmetic on what he had not thought to ask. She did not look back at the table. The door closed behind her with the quiet, precise click of a thing that had been properly measured and properly fitted. 7 months later, the Japanese maple Vanessa had transplanted from the Calder Street backyard to her new property on the east side of Charlotte, was putting out its second flush of wine-dark leaves in the September air. She could see it from the screened porch she had designed and built over the summer. Douglas fir decking and clear corrugated panels that let the morning light through without holding the heat. She had done the framing herself on weekends, the same way her father had worked, quietly, a piece at a time, not rushing because the finish depended on every step that came before it. She was sitting with coffee and a legal pad when Miles came through the sliding door with his own cup. He was a landscape architect she had met on a commercial site in November, a man with a way of looking at the physical world that Vanessa recognized. Someone who saw what was actually there rather than what he expected to find. He had asked good questions the first time they talked and had not performed for her benefit. He sat in the second chair and looked at the maple without needing to say anything about it. "Second growth is always stronger than the first," he said eventually. "That tends to be how it works," Vanessa said. Cole Development Group had closed the Greensboro project in March, secured a municipal contract in February for a mixed-use residential development that would be the largest project Vanessa had carried in 11 years of business, and was in active pre-construction on 2 additional sites. She had hired a third project manager in the spring and was in conversation with a second legal firm to handle the growing contract volume. The company's operating account, as of the previous quarter, carried a balance Vanessa had once imagined would take another 5 years to reach. She had built it right. Building it right had always been the plan. What she knew of Denise's circumstances came through the ordinary passing of information in a city where people who knew the same people mentioned things without intending to report them. The settlement had concluded exactly as Patricia had expected, cleanly and in Vanessa's favor. The Calder Street property, both units, remained with V. Cole Development Group. Denise received her share of the joint accounts, which were modest, and nothing else, because there was nothing else to receive when the assets that had appeared substantial had never been hers to begin with. Garrett Sims had vacated the guest unit the same week as the mediation, leaving a mattress and the furniture Denise had purchased on the shared credit card. Someone who knew someone mentioned that he was working a contract position for a marketing firm that had restructured twice in the past year. Denise had relocated to Greensboro within 60 days of the settlement. Vanessa noted all of it the way she noted any completed assessment. Accurate, filed, and no longer requiring attention. The maple moved in a small wind that came through the screen with the smell of cooling soil and mulch and the last of the summer grass. Miles was reading something on his phone. The morning was unhurried. A pot of tomatoes Vanessa had planted in the raised bed she built in June was visible from the porch railing, splitting at the seams with their own weight, deep red, done in their own time. She picked up the legal pad. The Raleigh site had early measurements to review and a foundation plan that needed one more walkthrough before she would trust it. There were always more questions than answers at the beginning of a project, and the answers only came if you were patient enough to ask the right questions in the right order and to wait for what the structure actually told you rather than what you hoped it would. She pressed the pen to the page and began. She had built everything worth keeping. And she was not finished building. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.